Discussions about the commons, what they encompass, and who controls them are not new. They date back to the 15th century court of Isabella, Queen of Spain. An Italian sailor and navigator named Christopher Columbus convinced Isabella that the world wasn't flat, and that the vast, uncharted saltwater domain was fundamental to continued Spanish security and prosperity. In the past, scholars defined the commons as Antarctica, the high seas, and space. Today, that concept has grown to encompass 4 domains: maritime, air, space, and cyberspace. As in the past, these 21st century commons are used by individuals, groups, and nations to transport goods, services, people, information, and ideas. At the turn of the 20th century, Alfred Thayer Mahan wrote that the greatest military utility of sea power was a healthy and profitable sea commerce, which would produce the wealth necessary to sustain a nation at war. Cruisers and dreadnoughts were useful in denying an enemy's sea lines of communication, and thus crippling seaborne trade. But the critical instrument of sea power and a nation's strength was fundamentally the merchant vessel, not the battleship. In an increasingly complex world, our security, defense, and prosperity depend on our ability to connect and communicate instantaneously, no matter the distance. Thus, assured access to the commons, the connective tissue of the international system, has become vital to the security and prosperity of the alliance and its partners and the entire international community. For 61 years, the enduring purpose of NATO has been to safeguard the freedom and security of the alliance. A large part of NATO's strength and success comes from its ability to use the global commons in accordance with international law. Over time, access has become paramount to our ability to move troops into far-flung theaters of operation, to maintain command and control through the use of advanced information technologies in space and cyberspace, to control airspace in support of combat and rescue operations, and to support international disaster relief across the globe. The maritime domain, the oldest and perhaps best understood of the global commons, is considered by many to be the circulatory system of the global supply chain. 90% of all raw commodities and merchandise travel by sea, with 75% transiting through international choke points such as a canal or a strait. More than 50% of the world's oil travels across the maritime commons. Both China and Japan receive 80% of their oil by sea. The ocean is the primary enabler of global trade, and key choke points like Malacca, Hormuz, and Suez are potential flashpoints for future conflict. In a complex world where technology is becoming more accessible, in an era when mobile missiles and high-technology mines are readily available on the black market, these areas become easy targets to those intent on denying the very access that facilitates our prosperity. Like the maritime domain, international airspace is open to use by all. By far the heaviest users of the open skies are commercial air carriers, which transported more than 3 billion people in 2009 alone. Adding to these congested skies is a growing air cargo industry that now transports over 8% of the world's high-value commodities. Combined with unmanned aerial systems, whose use has increased 1,000-fold over the past 15 years, and an already complex system becomes even more dense and vulnerable. And the adversary knows it. Denying access to air, long a province of only those most technologically advanced nations, is now just a page away for an adversary with sufficient means. Space can be characterized as a key enabler of the globalized world. Instantaneous communications, reconnaissance and precision strike, manned and unmanned flight, missile guidance, troop movements, and environmental reconnaissance are just some of the hallmarks of modern defense, and all of them depend on information relayed by satellites in space. The sanctuary of space, however, is becoming more and more elusive. If the Alliance were to lose access to space, it would struggle to defend itself. The ability to project power beyond the geographical limits of the Alliance would be curbed sharply, and the human and economic costs of fighting such a war would be staggering. And lastly, cyberspace, a unique domain that does not occupy a physical space. It does, however, depend on physical nodes, servers, and terminals that are located in virtually every nation. A discrete transmission may start via a cell tower in New York, be converted to a transatlantic fiber optic cable signal, then be relayed by a Dutch microwave to a French satellite in space, ending as a SATCOM signal to a commercial Chinese freighter at sea. Transmissions like this occur millions of times a day, illustrating not only the ubiquitous nature of cyberspace, but also the complexity of these elaborate systems. Clearly, the challenges and threats of today and tomorrow described in NATO's new strategic concept have become more diffuse, irregular, and unpredictable. With innovation and new technologies come new vulnerabilities and challenges. As we become increasingly dependent on space and cyberspace for communications, commerce, and security, adversaries will be looking for ways to restrict our freedom to act and to do us harm. This alliance has a long history of surmounting difficult problems, of coming together in solidarity, of providing leadership and innovative approaches to solve problems. And today, in the wake of Lisbon, it is in a unique position to build partnerships in support of our interests. It can do so by bringing together innovators and practitioners from the public and private sectors, and from industry and the military, to meet the central challenge of the coming decade, assuring access to the global commons. We will do so best by opening doors, preserving common spaces on the high seas, in the air, and in space, and more in a cyber world. Thus, we stand for openness and against exclusivity, and in common use of common spaces in responsible ways that sustain and nurture our mutual security and prosperity.